It happened in a mountainous region of Romania, where many old houses still keep ancient radios that no one bothers to repair. In one of those homes, a 6-year-old boy used to spend his afternoons sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by tangled cables and devices his family no longer used. He had no interest in looking at the sky and did not follow the news about 3i Atlas. His world was not up there, it was inside the noise, crackles, clicks, and vibrations he listened to with the same attention other children give to fairy tales. His father had found a damaged microphone in a drawer, one of those accessories that no longer worked properly, but still produced interference when connected to the radio. For the boy, it became a treasure. He spent long hours turning the frequency dial, hoping to catch strange sounds, small anomalies he recorded with a concentration unsuitable for his age. He was not looking for anything specific. He was simply fascinated by how noise could change from one second to the next. On a cold night in the middle of winter, when the wind constantly battered the windows, something different happened. The microphone began to vibrate with a gentle but regular intensity, as if it had accidentally picked up a signal trapped between channels. The boy drew closer, motionless, holding his breath. What he heard was not the typical irregular noise of interference. It had a marked cadence, a rhythm that repeated with mathematical precision. From that moment on, everything changed. The boy became obsessed with that auditory sequence. He struck the table trying to imitate exactly the pattern he had heard, repeating it over and over without tiring, without losing the beat. He did not act as if he were playing. He did it with the seriousness of someone trying to memorize something important. His parents watched him without understanding why he had suddenly lost interest in everything else. In the following days, the sound reappeared at exactly the same time each night. Every time he heard it, the boy adjusted the microphone with surprising precision, as if he knew exactly where the vibration was located. He recorded several of those sessions on an old cassette recorder, unsure whether it was even working, but determined not to lose that rhythm. The rest of the family heard only noise. He did not. For him, that cadence had a structure too ordered to be accidental. The most disturbing part came when the recording times were compared with local astronomical reports. Without anyone having told him, the boy captured the interference at moments that coincided with 3i Atlas, passing through a specific sector of the sky, visible from the region. It was neither a calculation possible at his age, nor an easily explainable coincidence. While adults heard only static, he heard, or rather listened to a rhythm that did not behave like a random phenomenon. Despite his young age, he acted like someone convinced he was following a code. He did not speak of lights or trajectories. For him, everything boiled down to a pattern that returned with exactness and that he tried to reproduce by striking the table, as if his memory depended on keeping that beat alive. The family did not know whether to worry or simply consider it another eccentricity of his childish curiosity, but it was clear that the boy did not experience it as a game. For him, that sound was not noise. It was a signal, and he had found it just when the comet made its quietest passage over the Romanian sky. As the days passed, the boy's routine began to turn into something more methodical. He no longer limited himself to turning on the radio and waiting for a particular sound. He had started classifying every interference he heard. He used old notebooks where he drew short lines, spaced dots, and small marks that imitated the cadence he managed to capture. He wrote poorly, but he reproduced the rhythms with astonishing accuracy, as if every fragment of noise were part of a larger whole that only he could interpret. His family began to notice that he prepared himself before each session. He carefully positioned the microphone, wiped the table, and adjusted the radio dial with focused movements. He always did it before the sky reached a certain degree of darkness, a time that coincided with the regular passage of 3i Atlas through the sector visible from that part of the country. He did not do it out of astronomical knowledge. He simply behaved as if his ear retained an internal memory of the exact moment when the signal returned. The night he managed to record the clearest sequence was also the one that most disturbed his father. While the father was reviewing some documents by the window, he heard the boy start to strike the table more intensely than usual. It was no longer a loose pattern. He was beating a perfectly repeatable cycle, a structure that seemed to have an internal order too regular to have been improvised. When the father approached, he saw that the boy had tilted the microphone toward the old speaker, and the tape was recording every vibration. On playback, both heard a succession of pulses that did not correspond to any ordinary interference. It was neither a continuous hum nor irregular noise. It was a defined rhythm with exact intervals between each pulse, as if the sound followed a mathematical construction that repeated without deviation. The father, lacking technical knowledge but possessing enough common sense, recognized that it had a structure too clean to be mere static. In the following days, the boy repeated the same pattern at different times, always with the same confidence. He beat it on the table, on the back of a chair, or even with his fingers on his own leg, always maintaining the same distance between impulses. He did not seem to be memorizing a sound. He seemed to be interpreting a message. Every time he played the cassette, he accompanied the sequence with his strikes, as if he feared losing the rhythm if he stopped repeating it. The most disturbing aspect was the change in his behavior. Before, he listened to noises without particular intent. Now he behaved as if the pattern were guiding him towards something. At times he suddenly stopped, tilted his head to one side, and seemed to try to mentally decipher the order of the pulses. It was a deep concentration, improper for a 6-year-old, that worried his parents without them being able to explain the real cause. The father decided to take the recording to an acquaintance, a sound technician who had worked at local radio stations. He was not seeking an extraordinary explanation. He only wanted confirmation that it was nothing more than equipment failure. The technician listened to the tape twice, adjusted the controls, and checked the recording quality, convinced he was dealing with common interference. Yet, after several minutes of analyzing the sequence, he frowned. Although he leaned toward the most pragmatic explanation noise caused by the age of the equipment, he could not help immediately pointing out what had struck him: the regularity of the rhythm. It was too stable and too repeated to be random. That observation only increased the family's unease. The boy, meanwhile, continued recording the same pattern every night. He did it without anxiety or fear, but with the assurance of someone who believes it has a clear purpose. He did not try to convince anyone. He simply acted as if he were hearing something obvious, and in his view, impossible to confuse with noise. While the adults wavered between concern and disbelief, the boy kept beating the same tempo, always firm, always precise. For him, that sequence was not a technical anomaly. It was order, structure, code. And he was convinced, without fully understanding how, that the sound returned each night with the intention of being heard. The situation took an unexpected turn when the boy began to anticipate the exact moment the sound would reappear. He no longer depended on turning the radio on randomly or adjusting the dial for minutes. He sat in front of the device a few moments before the interference emerged, as if his memory had established a direct connection between the passage of the interstellar object and the appearance of the pattern. For the adults, this was hard to accept. He had no access to clocks or technical information, yet his movements seemed calculated with astonishing precision. One night, the father decided to watch him closely without intervening. The boy took his usual place, set the radio to low volume, and adjusted the microphone with a serenity that contrasted with his age. No trials or prior rehearsals. He simply waited, motionless, eyes fixed on the device. 2 minutes passed. then one more. And suddenly the speaker vibrated with the characteristic sequence he had been recording for weeks. The boy showed no surprise. It seemed he had been expecting it with absolute certainty. This behavior led the father to document every session, noting times, sound duration, and pattern regularity. Comparing the notes over a full week, he discovered something disturbing. Every interference coincided with 3 eye atlas passing over a very specific strip of sky visible from the region. The phenomenon occurred neither before nor after, only during that exact window. The father was not an astronomer, but he understood the coincidence was precise enough to be more than chance. The boy, for his part, seemed to be refining his interpretation of the rhythm. He began dividing the pattern into fragments, striking first softly, then harder, as if trying to distinguish internal parts of the sequence. In his notebook, he stopped drawing simple lines and began creating vectors and segments that appeared to represent the sound structure. He could neither write long words nor read complex texts, but he reproduced the rhythm S-form with millimeter accuracy. One detail caught the father's attention. In one of the most recent drawings, the boy had divided the sequence into 2 clearly differentiated groups according to the distance between pulses. It was neither decoration nor childish variation. It was a classification, a conscious separation between 2 parts of the same sound pattern. When the father compared the drawing to the recording, he discovered the boy's interpretation was correct. The rhythm did indeed consist of 2 segments, repeated over and over. It was then that the father decided to take the recording to a second expert, this time an amateur physicist interested in radio astronomy, who analyzed signals as a hobby from a small improvised observatory. He listened to the audio, checked the frequencies, and immediately dismissed any typical interference explanation. In his opinion, that sound did not behave like noise generated by electrical faults. It also did not match ordinary terrestrial signals that might have leaked in accidentally. The physicist noticed a detail neither the sound technician nor the father had seen. The interval between pulses remained constant, even when intensity varied something extremely rare in common interference. He described it as a phenomenon too ordered to come from old domestic appliances. Although he avoided any extraordinary interpretation, he admitted the pattern deserved deeper examination precisely because of its regularity. At home, while the adults debated possible technical explanations, the boy continued listening with the same silent devotion. His behavior showed no signs of anxiety or confusion. For him, every repetition confirmed what he had been saying from the start. The sound had intention. Every strike on the table seemed to reinforce that inner conviction. His concentration intensified at the exact moments the interference appeared, as if his mind were aligning with an external rhythm. The family began to perceive that the boy was not simply imitating repetitive noise. He was interpreting a structure. A logical sequence he recognized without need of explanation. He did not know where it came from and could not justify it with arguments, but he acted as if he knew the sound's purpose. For him, that cadence was not a natural phenomenon. It was a message. Meanwhile, 3i Atlas continued its silent path across the European sky. Observatories recorded data normally, detecting no apparent anomaly. But in that house, in that remote village, a child followed a pattern that matched no known signal and seemed to repeat only when the interstellar object entered the appropriate sector. For the adults, the coincidence was starting to seem too perfect. For the child, however, there was only one certainty. The rhythm was not noise. It was a code that returned night after night, waiting to be understood. The final twist came when the boy began to perceive variations in the pattern that had not existed in previous weeks. Until then, the sequence had been stable, repetitive, and completely predictable to him. Yet one evening, as he calmly positioned the microphone, he adopted a different posture, as if he sensed something would be different. He sat upright, placed his hand on the table, and stared at the radio without blinking for several seconds. The signal appeared a few minutes later, but with a detail that disconcerted even the father, already accustomed to that particular interference. The rhythm had changed. The change was subtle, barely perceptible to an adult ear, but evident to a child who had memorized every pulse for weeks. The interval between two pulses had lengthened by just a few milliseconds, enough for the boy to stop striking the table and keep his hand motionless for several seconds, as if capturing an important transition within the sequence. The father noticed the gesture and noted the time without saying anything. The boy did not seem surprised. Rather, he gave the impression of listening to something he had been waiting for a long time. When the rhythm stabilized again, he resumed striking the table, now adjusted to the new pattern. He needed neither practice nor correction. He adopted the variation with the same ease an experienced musician adjusts the tempo of a familiar piece. With the audio recorded on tape, the father decided to contact the amateur physicist again. He invited him home to avoid further trips and let him listen to the recording without any prior details. The expert analyzed the variations through headphones and compared the new segment with the previous ones. At first listen, it seemed just another interference, but when he loaded the data into the computer and enlarged the pulses, he observed something that had not appeared in any earlier recording, an exact change at a single point in the cycle. For random interference, this was strange. It did not follow the pattern of a technical fault, did not correspond to a weather-related signal variation, nor to the usual fluctuations of an old device. It was too specific, too clean, too punctual. When the physicist finished examining the sound spectrum, he reached no definitive conclusion. Yet he acknowledged that the change was regular enough to raise suspicion. He was not prepared to declare anything extraordinary, but he admitted the sequence, as recorded, showed signs of intentional modulation. The father, upon hearing this assessment, immediately checked the recording time. The coincidence was unsettling. Exactly when the pattern varied for the first time, a small European observatory had published a technical note distributed hours later, mentioning a slight alteration in electrostatic intensity detected around 3 I Atlas. It was not news for official media, just an internal report, but the temporal synchrony was impossible to ignore. During the same period, the boy began behaving differently during the night sessions. He no longer waited anxiously and did not start striking the table from the beginning. First, he listened in silence, as if trying to capture additional meaning within the sequence. He remained still, tilted his head to one side, and only began reproducing the rhythm when he was completely certain he had interpreted it. Then, in his notebook, he made more complex drawings, incorporating internal divisions and new marks he had never used before. The adults noticed that the boy no longer saw the pattern as a simple, repetitive cycle. Now he structured it as if it were part of a broader message. The physicist who had analyzed the first recordings observed that the recent drawings resembled ordered transitions from one segment to another, as if someone had deliberately introduced a change into a previously stable sequence. The most striking detail was that the boy always marked the variation with a darker stroke, indicating exactly the point where the rhythm changed. The most unsettling event occurred 3 days after the first variation. The boy sat in front of the microphone earlier than usual, without consulting anyone, as if he knew something important would happen that night. He remained silent, hand on the table, notebook open. When the signal appeared, it did so almost immediately, but not with the usual pattern. This time the entire sequence was different. They were no longer repetitive pulses, but a set of linked fragments that seemed to form a larger cycle. The boy listened to the whole sequence without moving, and then quickly drew several lines in the notebook. It was not an improvised sketch. It was the complete structure of the new pattern. When the signal vanished, he gently closed the notebook and remained seated without making a sound. His expression was neither confused nor frightened. It was the expression of someone who believes that what he had been waiting for a long time has finally been completed. That same morning, the father checked recent scientific news. He found a notice from a European Space Observation Center. Instruments had recorded a small change in the speed of 3I Atlas. The change was neither abrupt nor spectacular, but it was real. The information had not yet reached the media, but it coincided exactly with the night the boy heard the altered sequence. The family did not know how to interpret all this. They had no way to prove the sound was directly connected to the comet, nor could they claim the boy understood a real message. But the succession of events was too precise to dismiss. Every recording, every variation, every strike on the table coincided with changes detected by instruments designed to measure the behavior of the interstellar object. The boy, meanwhile, acted with the serenity of someone who considers his task accomplished. He continued playing with the radio and microphone, but without the previous obsession. According to him, the rhythm had changed enough for him to know the sequence had concluded. He did not say it dramatically or mysteriously. He expressed it with the certainty of someone who recognizes the natural closure of a cycle. For the family, the mystery remained open. For the boy, however, the answer seemed evident. The sound had never been noise. It had been a pattern. And that last variation marked the end of a message that only he had managed to hear in time.